It's good to have you with me, though, tonight. We're going to break down a little bit of industry talk right now. Unfortunately, Dominic Guanzon's not with me, but I did give him the night off. Kind of wanted to fly solo at least tonight and whatnot. I wanted to fly solo just for the first official show of the summer of Sleepless with Steve. We're going to be talking right now, though, about Rotten Tomatoes, a website that I am not wholly fond of. I think it's good. I think I have the app on my phone. I don't check it as much as I used to. But I do love, as being a film critic, I do love film criticism. And I love reading film criticism. I get a lot of satisfaction on reading a lot of opinions on movies. I get a lot of satisfaction about diving into others' opinions in movies. And that's what Rotten Tomatoes is incredibly useful for. You can find a myriad of different critic reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. Everybody from A.O. Scott, Michael Phillips, Scott Mendelson. There's some really good writers that are on Rotten Tomatoes. I highly recommend checking out. But that's just it. Rotten Tomatoes is really a site that doesn't hold much value unless you actually read the film reviews. Now, if you don't know what Rotten Tomatoes is, I'll break it down for you, even though it's one of the most popular film websites on the internet, but some people probably might not even know what it is. Rotten Tomatoes is a review aggregate website. So basically, the whole core premise of Rotten Tomatoes is to assign an aggregate percentage based on how many critics liked a movie. This is where the misconception of Rotten Tomatoes comes in, okay? First and foremost, Cars 3 at the moment. They just had Cars 3 screenings yesterday, so the reviews are out right now. It's sitting at a 69% on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, that is not like a report card. That is not saying that Cars 3 is the equivalent of a D+. That is saying 69% of critics who saw Cars 3 recommended it. There's a real binary in Rotten Tomatoes, meaning that it's either good or bad. The whole premise of the tomatoes is that any film that's above 60% to 100 is considered a fresh tomato, where any film 59% or below is considered a rotten tomato. That's the catch there. Now, like I said, it's based off of percentage of critics that like it, so I'm going to give you a breakdown. Wonder Woman has a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes right now. That means 93% of the critics who reviewed Wonder Woman liked it. Meanwhile, The Mummy is at a lowly 17%. That means only 17% of people who saw The Mummy enjoyed it. There's a lot of problems with the Rotten Tomatoes, and a couple of which are outlined really well in the new AV Club article. Highly recommend you check it out. It's called Read This, Hollywood is Terrified of Rotten Tomatoes by Randall Colburn. Really good work by Colburn right there. I like AV Club. I like a lot of their writers. Him, Ignatiy Vishnevetsky. There's some really good writers on the AV Club. Highly recommend it as a website is for film criticism, thoughtful film criticism as well. The catch, though, with Rotten Tomatoes is that with that binary comes a lot of issues. There's very little in between with movies nowadays. Like case in point, I'll consider a movie that I liked but didn't love but didn't hate. Alien Covenant, okay? That's at a 71% certified fresh. That means it's certified fresh. It's locked in at a really fresh high rating, okay? 71% of critics who saw Alien Covenant liked it. I thought it was good. Now, the problem with Rotten Tomatoes is the movies that make headlines are not the movies that get between, I would say, like 30 and 80%. The movies that make headlines are the ones that either get a 90 to 100% or 0 to 20%. Those are the films that make headlines. And you've seen an interesting paradigm shift right now with movies. Consider the fact that Pirates of the Caribbean 5, Baywatch, and The Mummy are not doing very well. What are their Rotten Tomatoes scores? Pirates of the Caribbean 5 has 29%. Baywatch has 19%. The Mummy has 17%. That's the percentage of critics that liked it. Consider the films that are doing well. Wonder Woman, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Captain Underpants, the first epic movie. Those Rotten Tomatoes scores are 93%, 81%, and 85% respectively. The paradigm shift now is that as the movie-going audience, especially during the summer season, appeals to young people, people between the ages of, I would say, maybe 13 to 29, those people, they vet their purchases, and this is what Colburn talks about in the great AV Club article. Young people vet their purchases through the internet. Everything from video games, makeup, computers. I think the only thing people don't vet their purchases through on the internet that much are phones. I think they get the latest model regardless. And there used to be a time when movies were like cell phones. There used to be a time when movies were like cell phones, when people would go see the latest movie because Tom Cruise is in it. Well, by that logic, The Mummy would have won the weekend by at least $50-60 million at the box office. But that didn't happen this weekend. Wonder Woman, for the second consecutive week, was at the number one had the number one spot at the box office, $58.6 million. The Mummy came in second, $31.7 million. It's not a bad haul. It really isn't for The Mummy. But you know what? It is lower than expected. The same thing, and you really haven't seen a more tentpole movie. That's what the industry names movies that are really, poised to open either big or start a franchise or have a lot of franchise potential. You really haven't seen a film bomb worse this year in terms of expectations, in terms of real reception, and in terms of just potential, I would say, than Baywatch. Baywatch was a movie that had a lot of hype going into it from critics that said, oh, this is going to be the next 21 Jump Street franchise. And it didn't make the money they wanted to, and it's barely recouped its budget. I don't think it even has yet. So what you are getting now is as the new movie-going generation turns younger, they are vetting their purchases for better or for worse through Rotten Tomatoes, I would say. They are using the aggregate scores, movies that either get a 90% or a 10%, what's worth their weekend, what's worth their box office money, what's worth their hard-earned money, I should say, and what is worth supporting at the box office. Now, there's a couple factors in this, too. Number one is the fact, too, that hopefully this gets studios to make better movies. That would be the optimistic thing. Because it used to be, there's a great quote from Jay Sherman, the fictional character on the show The Critic, the old short-lived show The Critic from the 90s, is that he said if you stop going to bad movies, they will stop making bad movies. And that's a very good point. And I think you are starting to see that. Not to say that bad movies are going by the wayside, but what you are seeing now is that the dollar has a bigger vote right now. And in a time where tickets are not cheap, time is fleeting, the new millennial generation is not settling for Tom Cruise, Pirates of the Caribbean, The Rock in a Baywatch movie. They're not settling for that anymore. Just because Tom Cruise is in a movie doesn't mean people are going to automatically flock to it. Some will. Not everybody will. It's not that generation again. I'll tell you right now, Tom Cruise is looking at a bomb this year with American Made. That's a new movie that's going to be coming out later this year. I think it's going to bomb. I think it's going to be a catastrophe. It's got $80 million behind it. They give Tom Cruise that kind of money because they still believe he's a box office draw, and I think they're going to be sorely mistaken when that movie finally hits theaters. I will see it, but I don't think it's going to make that much money. So that's the real takeaway here. Now, there are some movies that are, of course, critic-proof, as we would say. It doesn't matter if Cars 3 gets a 69% really on Rotten Tomatoes or maybe a 40%. It's going to make a lot of money this week. Same thing, I'd argue, goes for the movie Rough Night to a degree. Maybe not, I don't know if Rough Night's invincible, but I think with the recent string of successful female comedies, considering Trainwreck, Snatch is still having a pretty solid run as it's kind of winding down its release. In addition to a few other movies, I still think that is not an infallible movie, but I think it's got a good chance to succeed. And then next week you have Transformers, which is going to kill it no matter what the reviews say. Most of the Transformers films have been negatively reviewed, but they still have gone on to make untold millions at the box office. So that's the real catch here. But I mean, at the same time, it really hurts movies like The Mummy, like Baywatch, these films like King Arthur too, even Power Rangers maybe to some degree, where these movies that are really keen on setting up franchises. But they don't get to set up the franchise because the first film gets very negatively reviewed, and then people don't get to see. People don't see it. They don't feel it's worth their time, and then it winds up piddling out of the box office. So that's really, I think, the takeaway here. Is that it kind of comes back to my point Dominic and I talked about a couple weeks ago, is that these studios are planning for franchises instead of films. They are planning for these big tentpole cinematic universes like the Dark Universe I just talked about. They are planning for that. They're not planning film by film. They're focused on making a successful franchise, not a good movie. So optimistically, there's a lot of criticism for Rotten Tomatoes, but optimistically speaking, Hopefully, this encourages studios to make better products. One can hope. I'm not holding my breath, but I'd like to think that that is in the near future. You can read that article, though, that I'm talking about Rotten Tomatoes, how it's terrifying Hollywood. You can read that on the AV Club website. I highly recommend that you do that.